Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Facts and Fallacies podcast. My name is Cameron English. Excited to be here with you as always. Dr. Liza Dunn over there.
Hello.
Very excited. We've got another unique episode. Last week, Liza, I said we're going to get back to our normal format. And then this week, we're totally changing it again. That's just how we roll. We're that exciting. We have a special guest. Her name is Leah Riter. And Leah, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then introduce a little bit about the topic we're going to talk about. Because broadly, it's about vaccines and autism, but there's so much more to the conversation. So before we get into that, just introduce yourself to folks.
Yeah, so I'm Leah Riter. I'm an analytical chemist that works for Bayer Crop Science. But more importantly, I'm a mom of a daughter that's on the autism spectrum. So I'm here to talk as a scientist, but as a mother of a child on the autism spectrum. And I want to talk about uh, the anti-vaccine movement and how it impacts the autism community.
I think this is a really important topic to cover, and it's one that's not getting a lot of attention in the media. And I think that's why we really wanted to raise awareness about this today. And so, thanks for very much for being with us and being willing to discuss it, because I think it's a very important aspect of this new pandemic of misinformation.
Well, and that's a good point because I was going to ask because I honestly have not followed this very closely with all of the information that's just hitting us constantly. I haven't looked this in a number of years, but from what I understand, and please, Leah, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been a handful, maybe more than that, of really well-designed studies that have looked at the association between particularly the MMR vaccine and autism. And from what I understand, nobody has found anything ever, over and over and over. Nothing ever changes, but the movement doesn't seem to die. The anti-vaccine movement, that is. And the rhetoric, especially recently, only seems to have gotten stronger. So maybe you can catch me up for one thing, but catch everybody up. Like, what's the status of the science, and where is the debate, if you even want to call it a debate? Like, where does that stand right now?
Yeah, so certainly there's a lot of good studies out there that show that there is not a link between vaccines and autism. And there were even studies or hypotheses about the preservatives that are in vaccines and autism, and that was also debunked. And the original studies that had hypothesized that autism was associated with vaccines have been uh, retracted due to flaws in their study designs. So there is a lot of scientific evidence to show us that vaccines do not cause autism. And I think, Liza, you have those articles we can post in the chat.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Yeah, I think that because of the Wakefield claim that there was an association between the MMR vaccine and autism, there really began an epidemic of worry about this association, and parents stopped vaccinating their children from a perfectly preventable childhood disease that has a very high morbidity and mortality associated with it. Measles is not like the chicken pox. It's not like a childhood rash that gets better very quickly. You wind up with immunosuppression for a couple of years afterwards, and people can get very, very sick from it. So I think that the general public underestimates the impact of measles on the population, and there are people who actually cannot get vaccinated because of underlying immunosuppression, or being too young from the measles. Measles is a live attenuated virus, or the measles vaccine is a live attenuated viral vaccine, and that can be problematic in people who are susceptible. So you really do want to have some element of herd immunity, so you're preventing those people who are vulnerable from getting sick as well. And the way you achieve that is by having population campaigns of vaccination. When Wakefield wrote his article, what he failed to tell anybody, he went and did a press conference, and what he failed to tell anybody was that he uh, had patented his own version of the MMR vaccine to replace the MMR that he said was causing the problem. He also thought he was going to make $43 million a year in litigation-driven testing using his kits that he was developing to test blood and urine for what he called or what he thought was going to show uh, vaccine related residues or remnants or whatever, and then would be able to use that in litigation. So this was not driven by a person who was actually interested um, in preventing autism. It had a big, huge conflict of interest when it started, and this is all documented in the British Medical Journal, and it was quite a bombshell. But it came out all of that came out much later than the actual article, which wasn't retracted for 12 years. So this has had a huge, huge impact and has really been unfortunate in that it's raised the suspicion of ordinary people about vaccines. And so I hope that this discussion can help us get your perspective about autism and things that are misinformation that's putting autistic people at higher risk.
So, Leah, question for you. And that's Brian Deer's investigation at BMJ, which is excellent. Everyone should read that. But why did autism become the target of the anti-vaccine movement? Was it just some anecdotal reports and then they turned this into a media campaign or what? Like, in other words, why autism? Why not, some other issue that they wanted to link to vaccines? Do you have any insight there?
I mean, I think it ties back to that Wakefield study. I'm not sure why they decided autism for that Wakefield study, but post Wakefield, that report, uh, that study just propagated and became popular, and the fear associated with that just propagated across the world. And once that fear took hold, there really wasn't a path back to taking it back. And so, no matter how many scientific studies debunked that work, the fear had already gone across the public. And so it persists. And and that guilt or that fear overrides the logic. And so I think there's this guilt of action. So I choose to vaccinate so I can cause harm versus if I do nothing, it's an inaction. I don't do something. And so just the fact that vaccination is an active choice, I think that's how it's propagated.
And like how has and I don't know what the autism community I suppose would correct me if I'm wrong, but like how have you guys reacted to this? Like after the Wakefield study came out and the media blew it up to the stratosphere, how did that community react to what was going on? Because I imagine you know the science of this issue very well and you're probably monitoring it very closely because it directly impacts your life. And then all of a sudden there's this story just exploding everywhere. What was the reaction from your perspective, and how has it evolved over time, do you think?
Yeah. So um, in one sense, it's just really sad. It's sad to see um, that. So first of all, there's stigma associated with autism, like other diseases or other conditions. Uh, People stigmatize people with autism, and so from a marginalized community, uh, then saying, well, this was a parent's choice, a parent's fault for doing this to their child, and you were neurotypical, and then your parent did something to you, and now you're atypical. It adds to that stigma, and so it further stigmatizes this community. Um, and then the children or young adults who are on this spectrum have trouble dealing with getting to, incorporating into the community. And as I found my daughter getting older, she's able to do this a little bit better, but she has setbacks when people reject her. And as the anti-vax movement becomes stronger, it seems that more people feel emboldened to reject her. And so that's quite hurtful. And if you're someone who has social skill challenges to begin with, it takes that much longer to recover from those. So yeah, it certainly does affect them. And then it also, I mean, the messaging is that I would rather kind of put my child's life at risk, like Liza was saying, that measles is a potentially deadly disease and could be deadly to somebody else. So for someone to reject getting the MMR vaccine, it's essentially a risk of death. And so they're saying that the risk of getting autism, if you do believe that linkage, which it isn't true scientifically, but if you do believe that, the risk of death or death to other people is worth the risk of getting autism. And that's a statement for how marginalized the autism community is.
You're on mute, Karen.
I'm such a boomer with my muted mic like this. So sorry, everybody. Okay, so back to the question. So it seems that the calculus is just warped in these people's heads, right? Like I'm sure most of them have never seen measles up close anyway. That's probably part of it. It's the survivor bias that everybody talks about. So they don't have a sense of what they're putting their kids at risk for and what they're putting other people's kids at risk for. But they do see autism probably, relatively frequently. And so in their minds, I'm again just armchair psychologizing here. It could be way off. But it just seems to me that they're probably looking at like, well, I don't want my child to end up like this person. And there's this disease I've never seen before. Maybe it doesn't even exist, right? Maybe, maybe these infectious diseases aren't real, right? I've heard some people say that. So, you know, is maybe you have more experience with this. Is that sort of how they're approaching this issue?
I think that's a probability. And I also think that maybe the cases of autism that they recognize may be the moderate to severe cases, but the um, less, the light autism or the high functioning autism, they may not even recognize. They may be around them and they don't see it. So when you say autism is one in, X number of people, they may be imagining one in X number of people in these more severe cases. So they may be disproportionately estimating the severity.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. I think that there's been a definite increase in the number of diagnoses of autism and autism spectrum disorders. And one of the things that people talk about is, oh my gosh, what is it? What is the environmental thing that's causing this increase in the incidence? I think it's actually an increase in diagnoses rather than an increase in actual true incidence. Kids, when I was growing up, who would be probably diagnosed with autism now, were just, they were thought of in a different way. They were not neurotypical, but they were absent a diagnosis, and so I think that it would be a kid that was just different socially in your classroom, that you would not have attributed a diagnosis of autism to. So I think that it's always been around. I actually think that autism might be selected for because I don't think you'd have as great scientists if you didn't have people who were so focused and so able to focus on very interesting, narrow questions. I think it's a really important um, component of scientific research that people are. I think it's selected for in the scientific community.
Yeah, I think that's true too. We often talk about like a touch of autism goes a long way in scientific research, and not that we have data to show that, but being able to focus in depth on a singular topic and persevere through the setbacks of science really takes some characteristics that uh, are associated with.
Mere mortals like us. But the other component of that is I think that one of the difficulties that scientists have is trying to explain themselves to the lay public. And I think that that could also be a feature, not a bug, of this phenomenon, is that there a lot of scientists just want to be left alone to do their work, and don't want to. They can talk to each other in depth about it, but they have a harder time explaining themselves, and I think that's why we've got an issue with scientific communication, generally. So I think we can all, if broaden our minds a little bit and open up to this as a possibility for trying to develop a little bit more understanding.
Yes, certainly. So neurodiverse does not necessarily mean inferior. It means diversity, bringing diverse perspectives to a problem often comes to a better conclusion.
So, if we can go back to the diagnostic question for a second, I'd really like to get a little bit deeper into what that means, because people hear you guys say that and they go, "Well, you're big pharma shills. Of course, you're going to say it's just we have better testing, but there's all these environmental chemicals and there's this and there's red dye number whatever, like they're just going to throw anything against the wall to refute that." So, for example, I read one paper from 2008 where they said in the 1980s, there would have been a ton of kids that would have been diagnosed with a developmental language disorder. But when you look at them today, unambiguously, they would be diagnosed with autism. So, either of you, if you have insight here, I mean, talk about some of the developments for why certain people are diagnosed as being on the spectrum today versus why they wouldn't have been in the past.
So I can give an anecdotal story in that my brother, who's my age, and then my daughter, who's diagnosed on the autism spectrum, have a lot of characteristics in common. So my brother was in elementary school in the 80s and was never diagnosed on autism spectrum, but he uh, didn't get along with people. He had a lot of the same characteristics, but he was put into, um, he has very high functioning as far as like skills, went to college and all that other, but in elementary school had a lot of behavior problems and was put into special ed for a number of years. And they just said he had, behavior problems. And I think if he was in school when my daughter was in school, he would have been diagnosed with autism. And I see them as halves, two sides of the coin. Like they get along like nobody's business. And I think he would have been diagnosed her age, but he's a case that fell through the cracks.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh,
So, maybe this is, I don't want to get too nerdy, but I'm really curious. So we have the diagnostics that have improved significantly in recent decades. Does that fully explain the explosion that people point to? Or is there something else going on? And I don't mean nefarious, but I mean, is there at the genetic level, is there something that's causing this, or what do we know on that front?
I don't have specific data, but I have a brochure from Autism Speaks that we can link into this that has some information about that that summarizes it, but I don't have the statistics right off the top of my head.
But it's definitely not on the order of what Stephanie Seneff says, that everybody's going to become autistic within a matter of a decade because they've been exposed to some environmental toxin. That's not the case at all. I really do think, and I think there are data that demonstrate that there's just been an increase in diagnoses because the kid who would have been billed as having behavioral problems like Leah's brother in your class in the 1980s would now be diagnosed as, on the spectrum. So I think that there's the broadening of the diagnosis and the broadening of the categories is really the reason why you're seeing this uptick. And when I first became aware of autism, um, I had a friend who worked at a residential community for children with severe autism. And these children were really very incapacitated, could not speak, had, stimming behavior, where and self harm, behavior of self harm. Um, those children are vastly different than, the children that were diagnosed as Asperger-y, and Asperger's was included on the spectrum, has been taken off that spectrum. But so that shows you that the definition changes, you include a greater population, and that's what's causing the apparent rise in incidence. It's actually not a rise in incidence; it's a recognizing of the actual prevalence of the disease, which I think is a nuanced reason why you're seeing it, but I think that's what it is.
Yeah, so the original classification of autism was a mental illness, and the only people who were diagnosed into that were people who were institutionalized, that are what you would call, the most extreme cases now. And so the people who are moderate or high functioning would not have been classified in that, and then it was recategorized later to be able to expand it, and the definition uh, was taken out of the mental illness and into this, um, neurotypical versus atypical category, and that's where it widened it to that spectrum where you have many more categories put in, and the Asperger's was brought into autism, and that's how that definition widened out. That can compensate whether that is accounts for every single new case, I don't know that, but we can, refer you to the autism speaks.
And there's some characteristic features when you're making the diagnosis that people include. So one of them is a different difficulty in social interactions. It's some language problems, having a difficult time communicating from maybe uh, having a paucity of communication. People they don't talk as much, or won't interact as much. Having a hard time recognizing language, and that may be even body language and responding to body language. Remember, language isn't just what you say and what you hear. There's a whole language in how you communicate your emotions and things like that. So, there's a difficulty communicating with body language. There's a different difficulty communicating orally or verbally, and then in more severe cases, you get behaviors that they call them stimming and things like that that can help um, physicians make the diagnosis of it in general. But these are very vague kind of things. It's not like a disease that you can do a blood test for and then have a diagnosis because you've had a blood test and an x-ray and things like this. And this is one of difficult things about trying to categorize a sometimes I don't know that I wanna say that it's a disorder. I think it's once again a spectrum, and people have different benefits from it, like scientists, and other people are really, have a level of impairment. So I think that it's hard to, put that all in one basket, um, because different people are gonna be different.
So as we wrap up here, how do we fix this? I imagine this is not going to be an overnight. We'll just pass a law, or we'll just, we'll we'll change a few words around. This is probably going to be, an intergenerational kind of a project to fix the way we view this. The vaccine thing's been going on for centuries at this point, so maybe there's not a solution there. But maybe if we just stick to this specific thing, Leah, what do we do to change the way people think about autism to sort of, reorient the discussions we're having?
So, there's actually been some research articles to show how you change people's minds on this, and one of the core things is the number of quality interactions somebody has with somebody on the spectrum. And that takes a couple of factors. One, it takes the person on the spectrum to have the bravery to disclose that they're on the spectrum. So the person that they're interacting with knows that they're on the spectrum. And two, it's the quality of the interaction that they have. So is the person who's receiving that interaction able to see that this is somebody who I can work with, that I can interact with, and that they have this open mind to be able to say, like, hey, this is also a person, and I see how they, add value to this world. And more of those interactions, the more interactions a person has with a person on the autism spectrum, the more they see them as human, and adding value. And so I would encourage people to, reach out, and cross that bridge, because I think that's the path that we'll have to have people understand that this is not a, uh, end of the world situation if you, uh, somehow end up with an autism diagnosis. Because I'd say that my daughter, yes, she isn't neurotypical, but she's a really good kid, and has a good life. And if people could realize that, I don't think they would put their children's lives as stakes, or their grandmother's lives as stakes, to avoid the potential of having a child like mine.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm reminded now of an anecdote from when I was playing basketball as a kid. We were in this, and it's not little league because it's not baseball, but the way that the rules worked is you would play to the finals, and then if there was a tie in the finals, they would flip a coin to settle who the winner was. And there was this kid on one of the teams who was autistic, and he was the only one with the courage to go, "This is the dumbest thing. Right? We play all season, and then we're gonna flip a coin. What is this? A coin flipping league? This is stupid." And I remember looking at him like, he's right. This is stupid. But it took him having the courage and the insight to go, What a waste of everyone's time." It's like, so we can't shoot one more basket to see who wins this.
I
Anyways,
love those moments where my daughter has the audacity to say something that everybody else in the room wants to say, but they have too much of that social face to say it. Uh, and that's what I think of having the neuroatypical actually adds value, uh, breaks
there
us
you
out
go.
of our comfort zone.
That's exactly right.
That's good stuff. I think let's land there. That's really good advice.
It
just,
is.
just interact with people that you're curious about or that you're unsure about. And then you might figure out that they're not all that different from you. Problem sol
That's right.
I think we might have actually somewhat solved this problem. We almost never get to do that on this show. It's usually like some world-ending disease or I don't know, just some tragedy or whatever that we're working on. But I think that's really practical. That's encouraging. Awesome. Okay. So you mentioned a little bit of information, Leah. Where should people go if they want to learn more about these issues that we've talked about?
I mean, Autism Speaks is my go-to resource for advocacy, for autism. And then I had gathered a couple of research papers, that I handed over to Liza, and I think we'll be able to link them to this podcast.
Yeah, we sure can.
Oh,
I gave him the can too. So,
motion.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to them in the show notes when we post this. I haven't looked, but I'm sure Autism Speaks is on social media, so you can follow them.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, maybe you're brave enough to be on social media these days. It's pretty risky. But do you have a public face that or public account you want people to follow at all?
Not on associated with autism. So just, kind of our normal science, thing. So on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay. Okay. Well, you can connect with Lee on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to have you back again to talk more about this because it's such an interesting topic. And as Liza said, we just don't cover this aspect of it, right? It's always like team science versus anti-vax, and it's the battle of the century, and that's all anyone ever talks about. And it's quite frustrating, even from the outside. So
Yeah, but it was very illuminating for you to share your story. So we really appreciate you coming on. I think it's a perspective that people don't get to hear.
yes, it's good. We'll have to come back to this more because I'm realizing how important this is as we're having this conversation. So we're going to end there for now. We're going to go jump on our space. Those are every Friday, 11 a.m. Central Time, live on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it. We talk about all kinds of controversial stuff that's science related like this. For example, this might be an excellent space topic. I'm sure
Yes, this would be.
we'll get a cast of characters, no doubt on that one. So come check those out. You can follow us. I'm at Cam J English. Liza is at Dr. Liza MD. Thank you so much. And then we will see you next time.
See you later.